Welcome to the SBCA podcast, Component Connection, where we explore the people, ideas, trends, and innovations shaping the structural framing industry. Regardless of how you touch this industry, we're glad you're here. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, I'm Sean Shields, Director of Marketing for SBCA, and I'll be your host for this episode of Component Connection. I'm joined by Steve Mickley, Executive Director of the American Institute of Building Designers. In this episode, we're going to explore a topic we haven't really covered before: residential building designers. These professionals are creating single-family designs day in and day out, and they're an essential part of any success of a project. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sean, for having me. I've been excited about getting on this show. It's been a while, but I got here as fast as I could.
And boy, are your arms tired, right?
That's it, yeah.
Steve, can you briefly share a little bit about yourself and the organization you've led for 21 years? Who are your members?
Yeah, I've been executive director for 21 years. The American Institute of Building Design, or AIBD, is an association that's been in existence for 75 years, since 1950. I was a member before being the executive director, and I drank more back then and was very outspoken. Now I'm just still outspoken, but they decided when the position was open to ask me to put up or shut up. And so here I am 21 years later. But who we represent is the professional residential building designers, just as you mentioned. And these are people who specialize in designing one and two family homes, townhouses, and in some places light commercial projects. And our members are across the country. Most of them, probably 2/3, are in the Southeast, where building codes and high wind exist, plan review exists, but also where golf courses and water exists, because, we're definitely looking for the higher profile clients whenever we can. But they're mostly independent design firms, but a lion's share of them is micro business owners. They're the people on the front lines battling housing affordability. 77% are 4 employees or less, including the owner. And 2/3 of those, half of our industry, works by themselves. So some of them are residential architects, some are engineers, but mostly we represent the vast majority of plan preparers who possess the know-how and the skill, but have never obtained or don't qualify for a license. I'm one of those people. I qualified in Colorado because Colorado is one of the few states that allowed experience to qualify for the architectural registration exams, but my wife's license plate says Forever FL, so I don't feel like we're leaving Florida anytime soon, so I just never took the exams. And in Florida, they require that I have a 6-year master's degree. And that's possible, but unlikely. There's one other thought I have, that the TPI standard is really the first official document that I'm aware of. And that's why I'm so excited to be here, is because it defines what a building designer is: the owner of the building or the person that contracts with the owner for the design of the construction plans. And I'm summarizing that, I'm sure, but that's precisely who we represent. The professionals who are creating the construction documents that builders, component manufacturers, and the trades are relying on.
Oh, excellent. So these residential building designers, as you laid out, they play a key role in the construction of our nation's housing stock. And, as you're talking about it, it's like, and I'm sure often they don't get the due they deserve. Can you give us a little bit of insight into some of the unique challenges your industry faces?
Sean, you're right. Building designers often don't receive the recognition they deserve. And I think one of the biggest challenges is just the visibility. Everybody knows the name architect or builder. I mean, Bob the Builder teaches that from a very young age, that an architect draws the plans. But that's causing building designers to fly under the radar, even though they're doing, like I said, the lion's share of the housing plans in America. We estimate that 90% of those plans, and if we're talking 800 million new single-family permits every year and an average cost of just $250,000. That's $18 billion in new construction design by people that are not licensed architects, but they're professionals operating within the architectural industry legally and competently, which leads me to another one of our challenges, and that's navigating the patchwork of all those state licensure laws and regulatory requirements. In some places, designers can practice freely, and others, the laws restrict their scope. I've worked in 11 different states, and you have to be, aware of what your limitations are. Sometimes it might be square footage. I think there's one state, Hawaii, that actually goes by cubic feet, believe it or not. And then lastly, like I mentioned, we're all micro businesses. 50% are sole practitioners, balancing the design work with running their business, keeping up with the software, the codes, the energy efficiency standards, and then, of course, those pesky clients.
So this is a lot like, I think, the structural building components industry in a lot of ways, and that most of them are smaller operations. And I think, one of the challenges there is, which you just identified, the time resource that exists, right? When you're a sole proprietorship or you only have a few employees, your ability to do a wide range of things is pretty limited to how much time do you have in each day. And when you have to run a business on top of it, you're doing sales and the design and everything else, it can be pretty challenging. So, Steve, from your perspective, what obstacles do you think exist that make it difficult for building designers like you and the members that you're talking about to engage directly with component manufacturers and framers on a daily basis? Is it just a time thing, or are there other things that get in the way?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's surprising to hear that the component manufacturers are such small entities themselves, which, I don't know, I guess is maybe a little reassuring because now we have something in common that we can start with. But you're right. It's time and bandwidth. Designers are focused on their clients, making sure the plans are code compliant, that we get permits, and there's little opportunity for communication back and forth between the manufacturers and the framers. But another barrier, I think, is the information flow. The manufacturers often direct their marketing efforts to the builders. So by the time the product makes its way into the project, a lot of the design decisions have already been made. And for example, this has nothing to do with components, but I have to deal with this week a situation where we have a masonry building with a second floor that's wood frame. And we designed the interaction of the stucco and the vapor barrier and an expansion joint right there where the materials change. Well, the builder decided to make a change in the field and put like a stucco band there. So now we're having to deal with how do we make sure that water doesn't leak? And it was the inspector, the building inspector, who stopped the project and said, wait a minute, you didn't follow the plans. So that's a huge thing for us, is that because of the lack of bandwidth, we hand the plans off to the builder, the plans go out into the field, but who knows, maybe there ends up being a huge point load right over an opening and nobody knows it because there's just no communication. Am I making any sense?
Yeah. I think that's a great point, is that for the building designer, you are working on the plans for this building at the front end, right? You're taking theoretical ideas and turning them into practical designs. But at a certain point, you turn it over to your client and it goes into a little bit of a vacuum, right? You don't really know what's going to happen with that plan until you start getting some feedback, right? And it's usually you get feedback when things are not clear or things are going wrong, right? And on top of that, it's not just, I know for component manufacturers, we're really focused on the structural framework, right? We're interested in the bones of the building. But as you just pointed out, for the building designer, there are so many aspects of that building that are potentially feeding back information to you of like, oh, we need to fix this, or we need to adjust this, or we need to do this. As sometimes it's great if it happens before the building's under construction, but sometimes it happens while the building is under construction, right?
Right. Mostly. It seems that way anyway, but I think technology is changing, and The introduction of plan review. I mean, sometimes I go to conferences across the nation and I end up in a class where they're talking about load path. And I'm thinking to myself, is this the first time this state is hearing about load path? Having been raised in Florida, hurricanes have been a part of my life forever. And so we've always been cognizant of how do we keep the house standing up, but then not blowing away at the same time. So
There's a lot there. I mean, Steve, given that, I mean, what would you say is one piece of advice that you'd give to, let's say, component manufacturers and how they could maybe more effectively communicate and even collaborate with building designers like you and your members on a daily basis? What should they do?
oh, we're thinking on the same wavelength because that's where I was going is with the one idea that I have is how do we get the designers involved early in the process with the component manufacturers so that not only can we avoid mistakes or inconsequential circumstances, but, there's so much data in those CAD files or BIM files that the manufacturer creates that could help the building designer from the aspect of, hey, if you just make the building 1 foot longer, we can be more efficient. Where, you get all the entities together, and when everybody looks at how the building's going together, we can make it more efficient if we just make certain changes. So one of the issues that I have in the field is that 99 times out of 100, I have to have a builder involved, and the truss company wants, deposits before they start the truss layout design. But I find that those 8.5 by 11, and I'm just talking truss components here for right now, those 8.5 by 11 cut sheets are an invaluable tool to me. They're like hiring an engineer because they're going to give me my uplift calculations at every point. They're going to give me my reactions, the gravity loads at every point. They're going to give me lateral loads, and they're really not hard to learn how to read. But if we could work out a way where truss manufacturers are, getting involved in the design, even if there's a fee for that design that could maybe be discounted if they end up being the company that builds the truss set. But by doing that, it's not just offering the service, it would then have to be followed up with education. Education like, webinars and lunch and learns and conference attendance so that, you teach the designers how to read those sheets, how to use them as a tool, and sell yourself on how valuable the information that you have, the data that you have in your CAD files.
Steve, what that makes me think of is we typically talk about the relationship between the component manufacturer and the builder. And the first time they work together, there's usually a lot of back and forth. They're feeling each other out, trying to figure out what do you need? How do you like certain things done in the field? What do your framers need? Whatever that is. And typically there's a feeling out process for the first 5 projects or so. But typically by the 6th project, maybe it's the 11th project, they get it down where it's like the component manufacturer, because they have their designs and their advanced software, they know what settings to put in the software. They know what approach they should take for individual component designs. And so they'll give the builder exactly what they're looking for after a short period of collaboration, 5 to 10 projects. And it sounds like that might be a model to adopt here as well. This idea of, the very first time a component manufacturer is working directly with a building designer, let's say on a set of plans, providing some feedback, working it out. But for this first few projects, there's a lot of communication that has to happen back and forth. How do you want this done? What are you going to deal with this? Oh, this is the first time we've had a project that has this come up. How do you typically want to handle that? A lot of back and forth and sort of over communication beyond just like little snippets of RFIs where you're asking for a specific detail. But then by like the 5th project, 10th project, the component manufacturer knows what the designer is going to do. And the designer also has gained a great deal of information about how the component manufacturer goes about doing what they do with their plans. And so in the end, you end up getting a much more efficient process because the designer should design for the component manufacturer's product, the structural design elements, and the component manufacturer is working with the plan. So the two of them really have to collaborate and essentially learn from each other, right? So Steve, my question would be, how do we get that done, knowing that these building designers, in a lot of cases are, sole proprietorships or for people? What does the component manufacturer do to start getting on the radar of those guys and having a little bit more of a collaborative relationship?
Ultimately, we all share the same goal, and that's delivering a better home for families.
Well, so Steve, is there anything that a component manufacturer can do right now to begin opening lines of communication with these residential building designers, to begin collaborating with them?
The first opportunity that comes to mind is through our website. We have a link, aibd.org/webinars with an S. And the page lists all the webinars that we have scheduled, but at the top, there's an opportunity to present to the AIBD community. When you click on that, you land on a calendar. You choose the day that you would like to present and time, and then a form will open up that'll ask the bio of the speaker, who the speaker is, the topic, and a short description. And once that's submitted, within a day or so, our staff reaches out and we work out the details for getting you in front of the 4,000 or so people that we have in our community. Now, we won't necessarily have 4,000 people at the webinar. We probably average 25 to 50, depending on the topic, but we record them and then we put them in a library that's made available to AIBD members 24/7.
Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspectives and giving us some insight into residential building designers.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you to everyone else for listening to this episode of SBCA's podcast, Component Connection. If you've enjoyed this episode and found it valuable, please like it and share it with others. Stay up to date and in the know by subscribing to SBCA's Component Connection on whatever platform you use most.
Thanks for listening to Component Connection, brought to you by SBCA. If there's a topic you'd like us to explore in a future episode, email us at podcast@sbcacomponents.com.